Hello, and welcome to another episode of the William Branham Historical Research Podcast. I'm your host, John Collins, the author and founder of William Branham Historical Research at william-branham.org, and with me I have my very special guest, Darrell Carlisle, former member of Christ Gospel Church. Darrell, it's good to have you back. We've been talking back and forth through email and text messages, and there's just so much more to tell about Christ's gospel. And it fascinates me because it's literally maybe 3 blocks from my house. I just walk out my door this way, and if I walk through the schoolyard and walk beyond it, it's just right there. And yet, this whole thing was connected to Branhamism. Not many people know it. And in this area, it's weird because if you mention that you may or may not have escaped a cult, if you're in a restaurant or talking to your doctor or whatever, they say, oh yeah, there's 2 cults there. There's the Branhams and then there's the other one. What's the other one? And they always say, what's the other one? They're unfamiliar with Christ's gospel, right?
Yeah.
And so much more to tell. So you and I got to talking, and we thought we'd have you back and talk through some of the crazy.
Yeah, that's plenty to talk about. I'm not. We need more than an hour here, but that's okay. We'll go over some of the highlights. Yeah. No, thank you for having me back. I appreciate that. I was just kind of looking back at what we talked about, and it's funny. I mentioned to you earlier. It's like all of a sudden, I mean, a lot of things that when you're doing these things, it's kind of hard to remember everything, and then you kind of get off on other things, and all of a sudden, I mean, a lot of these memories just started coming in, and some of the stuff that we went through, my wife and I, and so I thought, I'm just going to start from the very beginning of how we got into this, and then it'll kind of paint the picture more of who I am and what I went through to get me to where I'm at today. So if that's okay, well, that's kind of where I'm going to go today.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. You and I, last time, we hit it off when we started talking, and we really didn't get much into your story. So having you back a second time is probably a good idea.
Yeah, no problem. One of the things I did want to just kind of touch on is everybody was really kind in the comments and things that after that came out. One of the things that I really wanted to just briefly mention was one of the comments from someone was that they like to use the word reprogramming. And I totally understand where that comes from. I've heard that from other folks too. But kind of the way I look at it is if you reprogram something, I feel like you're starting with something that you're kind of keeping, you don't want to let go of it, so you kind of redo it and reprogram it. And I feel like that's what we did. We took what we had, we reprogrammed, and so we didn't. When we left one crazy situation, we stepped into another, and then another, and then another. And so I like to look at it. I love the word deconstruct because I feel like if you reprogram something, like I said, you're still kind of at the same hard drive, you still got the same software, kind of different. And I feel like if you really have to get it all the way down and then start with a whole new software. Like just start with you got your hard drive and then build from there. One of the things that I didn't mention last time that I like to think of it as deconstructing and then reconstructing something new, something better, something more safe. And that's just my thoughts on it. And I feel like that it's scary to use the word deconstruct, but I feel like if you really want to move on, I feel like it's something that's very important to do. So I just kind of throwing that out there. Hopefully it's not offensive, but that's just my 2 cents on that. So
yeah, I'm a sci-fi fan, and in the sci-fi world, you have these androids and robots, and they can be programmed for good, bad, evil, whatever. And whenever they're reprogrammed, they're not always necessarily reprogrammed to something good. They could be also repurposed for something bad. So reprogramming for me, it's a weird word because I see programming as vile and destructive and evil. To program somebody's head is bad. And if you use the word reprogram, well, it means you're programming somebody's head again. I use de instead of re. You're taking the knowledge out. But like you said, deconstruct, because deprogramming only takes you so far. You still have the foundation that you basically were built upon. And until you deconstruct that foundation and then start with a clean slate, you really can't reconstruct. So that turns into a very difficult journey if you really, if you don't take the extra work to completely deconstruct.
No, I agree. I agree. Yeah, no, I 100%. And I just think I know it may sound silly and trivial to some, they may not, but I think it was just, it was worth kind of just touching on that. But no, that's good. So tonight I was just going to talk about my personal journey. Again, add a little color commentary to, who I am and again, why I chose to do this whole path. But this all started, I was about 5 or 6 years old. I think I was in first grade maybe. And my mom worked in a factory, and she met a lady that she became very close to, very good people. In fact, her son, I was very close to her son and her daughter and the family. And he's in one of the stories that I'm going to tell tonight. It's actually, it's quite funny, something I did at one of our little events. But anyway, so at 5 years old, 6 years old, we started off, and we were going to a small Pentecost church, family church, and my uncle was the pastor. And we didn't go that often, but we went some. And it was a tiny one-room building, which actually is where I proposed to my wife in. And so we were going there, and then Mom met this lady, and we started going to Christ's Gospel. And it was a big change for us. My mom started adopting the dress code. My dad, he didn't know what to do with it, right? And as kids, these organizations, they love it when the kids come in because we're very impressionable. And we talked about programming. They can program you right away, right? Because you're in your formative years, and that's kind of what happened to myself and my sister. And so that's kind of the genesis of how we got into this to begin with. Renee was born into it. I wasn't. So as time went on, my mom started, my sister started having to adopt the dress code. I wasn't supposed to wear shorts, which I did. We weren't, supposed to watch TV. My dad was not on board with any of this. And as the years went on, that became a really tough situation for them. And as I get into my story, you'll kind of see where my dad started kind of dabbling in this, in Christ's Gospel on and off through the years. But as we got going, again, like the dress was very apparent. And then some of the other things that started to happen is that we started to pull away from our family because my uncle would always do Easter egg stuff. Like Easter, they would do a hunt for the kids. Well, that was out, right? Every Sunday for Easter, we did sunrise service where we go have breakfast, and it was a full day of indoctrination, right? And so as kids, and it was kind of sad for me because I knew my cousins and everyone else, they were out having fun and doing these things. And as we got older and got more into it, we started to kind of adopt these mindsets that, oh yeah, now I understand why that's wrong, or, well, which we didn't, but we thought we did. We were kids. And so those are some of the first things that started happening, and you start losing a lot of the freedoms, and you're not growing up like everyone else around you, right? Like you see your friends doing things and going to school dances, and like when I was in school, I'm sure you grew up in this. You weren't allowed to go to sex ed, right? So now all of a sudden you start being alienated from some of your friends, and they don't know what to think about it, and constantly feel like you had to explain why, these things were, why I wasn't there. And the answers we had, and I look back at it now, my friends, they were very kind, because the answers or the explanations I would give were just, they made no sense at all, now that I look at it. But, and I'm sure yourself growing up, I mean, did you experience some of the similar situations like that?
Oh, absolutely.
As a child?
Absolutely. And there's a part that a lot of people overlook and miss. So, yeah, sex education, that's taboo. Most of these cults are like that. But the dancing, I could never go to a dance, to a prom, anything that normal kids did. I wasn't a normal kid, so you can't do it. But it's deeper than that. So what children are missing out when you rob them of connecting with other children their age is you're really taking them out of the culture. And in a cult, that's by design, because the cult wants to establish its own culture, which is in effect counterculture. So in counterculture, they're isolating, even if they're not isolating from the rest of the world with walls around them or whatever, they're counterculture, so they're isolating their culture to change the way people act and think and change their worldview. Well, the problem is that if you don't share the same culture with your peers, what happens when you grow up and you go into the workplace? Well, then nothing really, there's no way to connect. There's nothing that really makes sense. And the culture idea hit me in a very funny way because I'm in IT, and you have the water cooler talk whenever you're around talking to people at work, or you'll be in a meeting and they'll use these phrases, and they're making cultural references that I didn't have. And sometimes those are from television, sometimes they're from games, sports, from whatever it is. Well, there were a lot of television references in one of my first IT jobs, and I felt so out of place because we weren't allowed to have television in the Branham cults, even though sometimes we did, sometimes we didn't. By and large, you didn't watch television. You weren't supposed to. So after I escaped the cult, I literally watched, and not like watch viewed, but while I'm working, I would have it on a monitor over here. I watch more television than most humans will in their entire life, just sun up to sun down, listening to it so I could pick up the references. And when a joke was made, I'd get it. And I'm shocked today how much that helped me, because I'll be in a conversation and sometimes they'll be talking the culture. Sometimes I'll know more about the culture than they do. So now I kind of fit in.
Yeah. We had to catch up, man. We had to catch up.
Oh, yeah.
This takes me to one of my funny stories that actually it's a great segue, because when I got a little older, again, I was always in it, but I wasn't, because I would wear the shorts, I would do all this stuff. And I remember, my Kentucky Wildcats, which by the way, I was going to wear black today in the morning. That was a horrible game against Tennessee, but I remember, And you, as someone who's not a Kentucky fan, you might have been happy when we got put on probation back in the late '80s, when that mysterious envelope opened up with the money, and we went on. And so I was forced into this purgatory of the games were tape and delay, because I was a huge Kentucky fan. I would be gone at my friend's house when Kentucky played. I begged him, like, can we please watch this game? And they were all Indiana fans. So, anyway, we were tape delayed, and we would come on at 10:30 at night. And I remember we weren't supposed to watch TV, and I would go upstairs real quietly, and I would turn on the tape delay and turn it all the way down. And I remember my dad came up one time and was like, "You're not supposed to be watching that." And I'm like, "Okay." And but he knew he really wasn't. He was like, "Okay." And I looked at him, and we both knew. "Good night, Dad. I'm gonna watch the game." And I remember telling my friends, like, if I'm gonna go to hell for watching Kentucky, I'm okay with it. Because I was like, that's my Cats, And so that was me, always kind of bucking the thing, because I was like, man, this is kind of crazy, And I remember. I loved Saturday Night Live, because, again, culturally, I wasn't getting any of this, right? So, again, I would go spend the night with people, and we'd watch Saturday Night Live. And one of my favorite characters was Dana Carvey and the Church Lady. Okay?
Oh, I love that.
And so, yeah, he was great. So we had the trunk or treat where, they didn't call it Halloween party, fall party or whatever. And they would always bring us in on Halloween, and we'd have to dress up as like Bible character, whatever. It was like so silly. I'm in high school or whatever, 8th grade. So I dressed up as the church lady. Oh, and I went to this thing. And the leaders, they didn't know who it was, and they're like, well, "Who are you?" And I would like do some of the quotes, and I know they knew, but
Yeah.
they acted like they didn't.
Well, you
And
could
I
have
would,
just said, "I'm
but I
Sister
had a lot of
Hicks."
fun with it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because I had the dress on and the pillow and my to make it big. Oh
Yeah.
yeah, they would have believed that. Oh my God. But yeah, I remember that was one of the because I was like, man, my mom doesn't know who this is, and because she didn't, and because like she took me there, right? And so anyway, so and we would do, and I know another one. I guarantee I know you did this. They would take us to, again, in indoctrinating us, they would do the lock-ins, right? And so we would do these things where they bring us in, and we would do all these crazy services, and then we'd go in there and we'd run around, shout and scream, and then we would go in the back and eat and whatever, and we'd all stay there, and nothing bad's gonna happen, right? A bunch of teenagers locked in overnight in the big church building. So one time they decided to do a lock-in for a fast. Okay, it was all guys, and the one thing that I just thought was just the silliest thing of all. I always thought, okay, running is stupid. Riding a bike is stupid because I can drive somewhere. I'm like, man, like to me, I'm just, I'm like, man, why would I run if I could? Like, if you don't have a car, I'll come pick you up, or you don't have to run, And so fasting was that for me, right? I was like, I don't get it. It's silly. Like, I want to eat, man. And so they would always do these fasts, and so my mom signed me up for this weekend fast thing. So Friday, I was like, all right, Mom. This is a true story, by the way. I said, you got to take me to McDonald's because if I'm gonna fast all weekend, I gotta have something. So she takes me to McDonald's. I get a double cheeseburger and fries and a Coke, right? And so I get there and we do our crazy service. Whatever we did, and I got through the first night and I was miserable, man. All I could think about was eating. And so the next day we get up and we get up and they're like, all right, we're gonna go have our little service and everything. And I don't know how I what I told them, but I said I got to go in the back because in the back was the fellowship hall, which I'm sure you had those too. And our church did this. And I'm sorry if one of my old pastors hears this and back from the day, but I'm confessing right now. And so I go in the back. And we did this thing every year. We participated in the fall festival. It's our big fundraiser. And we did egg rolls. Was one of our specialties. So I'm out there. I said, hey, pastor or whatever, I got to go. And so I go scrounge around the kitchen, okay? And I find this big freezer full of egg rolls. And I'm like, oh, yeah. Yeah. So I go in there. I don't know how I did not get caught, okay? I microwave an egg roll. And I scarf it down, man. And I'm like, man, that was good. So I got me another one, and I cooked it, and then I hurry up and get back to to the service. And so no one, I don't know, maybe they knew, I don't know, but they didn't act like they knew. And so we're doing our little service again, and I brought this Nerf basketball hoop. And you probably remember the little orange with the little net and the little orange like styrofoam ball. And I thought, and I took tape and I made a 3-point line for everybody. And so we were playing basketball, and and we were having fun, but we're using a lot. We're burning up calories, right? And so here I am, I'm full, and I'm having fun, and so that afternoon, my friend who his mom was the one that got us in, right? He comes to me and says, hey. I'm gonna tell him I gotta go to Stop and Go. Will you go with me? Which is a block away, right? So somehow the leaders let us walk to Stop and Go. So we get outside, and he's like, "Hey man, I'm really gonna buy us a pizza." And I'm like, "Oh man, I don't know if we should do that. We're fasting." So I'm sitting there playing it up, And so I'm like, "Okay, I'll go with you. I don't want you to go alone." So we go down to Stop and Go, and we get us a piece of pizza. He's like, don't tell anybody. I said, oh, man, I'm not going to tell anybody. So we get back, and we go back, and we do our little service again, and we go back, and we're playing basketball. And like all the other guys are just starving, and I'm running around like I'm on crack or something. And my friends are like, "Man, you got all this energy." I'm like, "The Lord's blessed me. I don't know, you know." So here I am. I'm on after another meal. So it gets worse. So I go. Well, I don't know if it's worse, but anyway, they go out to the thing, and I'm like, "Hey, I got to go in the back again. I got to grab something." I remembered that all the Sunday school rooms that were back by the kitchen had bowls of the little Hershey's Kisses, and so I start going, and I'm like, oh, I was smart. I'm like, well, if I eat all of them out of this bowl, someone's going to wonder what happened. So I went. There was like 7 different rooms, so I took a little out of each room, and now I'm like hyped up on sugar. And so I spent that whole weekend. I was so full by the time I got through the fast. It was amazing. But and I, looking back, I'm like, I knew, like, I wasn't cut out for this cult thing, man. I couldn't even get through, a 2-day fast with my friends,
And everyone else
So
thought the Spirit of the Lord has hit Darrell. He's gaining weight while the rest of us are shrinking.
Yeah, it's like I've been praying and fasting for the Lord to help me gain weight for football season, whatever. Oh my goodness, that is so bad. I've only told a few people that story, but that really really happened. So, but yeah, and I'm sure you guys did the lock-ins, all the indoctrination where they, like I say, they got you in there, and this further drove home, the cult, and looking back at it, it's very unfortunate, because again, your culture was just your little group,
Right.
and you're very separated from everyone around you, and like I say, as time went on, the older I got, the more the crazy that I was exposed to. And I remember at this same point in time, we had some friends in our little neighborhood, and one of the things that they always wanted you to do was bring other people in, right? And I'm sure you were the same way. And I had a friend that I had invited, and it's crazy because they lived behind us. And his parents took us to play putt-putt golf one night. And they were like, hey, I know you've invited our son, but I need to share something with you. We were a part of that church before you joined it. And I was old enough, they were like, I don't want to, they were trying to be respectful, but they said, just so you know, we left because the pastor, they swapped wives. Now, not the pastor I was under, the one before us.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and I don't know why they allowed their son to go with me. He didn't only went a few times, but they brought me. I spent the night with them, and they said, by the way, we have some things we want to give you. You can just take it to your home. We want to get rid of it. And they went and they brought a bag of these books, a lot of her books, in which we all know they were all copyrighted or plagiarized, I should say, from other charts and graphs of other folks, including Branham, which they all stole them from. I can't remember what it was. It wasn't Parham. Do you
Clarence
remember?
Larkin.
Larkin. It was Larkin. Yeah. So they sent me home with all those books. And I remember when I was a kid, one of the first really crazy things, like, now, besides, you really didn't know how extensive this was, but there was a very prominent figure in the church, and he became ill with what I'm assuming was cardiovascular disease. And Bernice, which I having a hard time even calling her Sister Hicks, I just call her Bernice. But anyway, she had told this individual that I can't give any respect, that she had a physician that she knew that had eyes in his fingers, okay, in Mexico, all right? And she sent this gentleman down, and God only knows what treatment he had, which was probably some holistic weird stuff that he cooked up. And he ended up having, I believe it was an MI, and died shortly after all that went down. And that stuck with me, because I looked around. I wasn't a dumb individual, and I started like man, that was unnecessary. Like, because I knew, like, okay, no doctor, no one has eyes on their fingers. Number one, and then to go that far to convince someone, so much so that they're willing to listen to you and then lose their own life. And that was, I can only imagine that happened over and over and over in different ways in all of these cults, right? And I'm sure that, you probably experienced something, maybe not like that, but that whole thing of just basically taking this so far, and it's such a crazy thing that you would convince someone to follow you into that, and then they would do it. And I'm sure that I don't know if I'm curious to know, did Branham, did he kind of poo-poo some like contemporary or modern medicine or things like that? I don't know if you experienced that.
Oh,
in your
absolutely.
time.
Absolutely.
There.
So this thing was built off of John Alexander Dowie. Dowie was the prototype for all of this. And Dowie completely shunned medicine. He said the doctors were the devil's workers, and completely, except for whenever he needed his own medication, he would, he would do his thing.
Yes.
But he would say, you have to have the faith to heal yourself. And what happened, and so he was a fundamental pillar in Pentecostalism. Dowie was one of the two main sects that Charles Fox Parham visited to model and prototype his cult after. But what happened was, people started doing this and people started dying, and it was turned over to the legal system. And the legal system was really cracking down on this type of faith healing doctrines. And so what they did was insidious. There was a guy out of Dowie's cult named F.F. Bosworth, Fred Francis Bosworth. He's the one who mentored Branham in the healing revivals. And they come up with a scheme where the positive confession scheme, they basically put it on the shoulders of the people who were in the healing line seeking healing. Said, you can get the medicine, but God doesn't heal you through that medicine. You really need to come to us. And if you claim it, then you're healed. But if you go and you doubt, it's going to come on you even worse than you had it before. So it was this mind game they started playing with the people. And what happened was, it's awful when you think about it. When you think about cults, and you think about like Jonestown, where almost 1,000 people gave their lives for Jim Jones drinking the Kool-Aid, that's actually a small number if you consider all of the people who were manipulated to believe that they had the power to heal themselves when they could have just had a little medication and lived. And there were many people who died. In fact, in the support groups, I have friends whose their parents, one of their parents, maybe their mother, needed some simple medication, and she could have got it and she could have lived, but she wanted to have enough faith and power to cure herself, so she didn't take it. And then the pastors, they wash their hands of it and say, well, I never told her not to take her medicine. I just said if she had enough faith, she wouldn't need the medicine. So it all turns into this mind game, and it is a deadly mind game. Have you ever wondered how the Pentecostal movement started, or how the progression of modern Pentecostalism transitioned through the latter rain, charismatic, and other fringe movements into the New Apostolic Reformation? You can learn this and more on William Branham Historical Research's website, william-branham.org. On the books page of the website, you can find the compiled research of John Collins, Charles Paisley, Stephen Montgomery, John McKinnon, and others, with links to the paper, audio, and digital versions of each book. You can also find resources and documentation on various people and topics related to those movements. If you want to contribute to the cause, you can support the podcast by clicking the Contribute button at the top. And as always, be sure to like and subscribe to the audio or video version that you're listening to or watching. On behalf of William Branham Historical Research, we want to thank you for your support.
We had a pastor later, and we moved to North Dakota, and unfortunately, his wife had kidney disease, and they were part of the Word of Faith, and you're talking Copeland and Hagen and all those guys. And what they taught, that if you didn't get healed, you just didn't have enough faith, right? And she ended up passing. It was a tragic thing that happened to her, but I always felt so bad because I know that even though she had this disease, and she did seek medical treatment, I will give her that. But she was taught, and I'm assuming she believed that she never was able to get over this because she just simply did not have enough faith, and that is very criminal. That is very criminal, very sad. But but one of the things besides that, we did church camps. I wanted to, and when I was in high school, we would go every year. And I remember we would get a special treat a couple times, and it was Bernice showing up in her limo or whatever. And she would come, and they would bring her down in front of all of us. And one of the things that I remember very, very distinctly about her is that she was never a happy person. She was always very assertive and dominant, and I think that was part of the persona. I think you had to be that dominant figure so people would stay in line. And we would be invited to ask her questions. And I don't remember the questions, but I remember her sitting in this chair with a blanket draped over her lap and just talking at us and barking at us, and it was never enough, right? We were never doing enough of the works or whatever else, and everybody was afraid of her, and she was very intimidating when you give them that power, and we were all in, right? We gave her that authority. She did not own it. There was nothing she did to earn it. It was simply, she was a very twisted and sick human being, and came in and just like I say, it was a very dark memory for me just to see her there. And then when she would get done spewing this stuff that made no sense to anyone, and then she would do that scream, when she'd get the quote unquote witness. And then she would get up and they would walk her, and we would all be in awe, and she'd go back to her limo. And because that camp was, I remember Circle J Ranch is what, it was about an hour or so from Jeffersonville. It was about an hour north of or east of. So that was in not Brown County. It was on 64 between Evansville and Jeffersonville. That's where that camp was. And Linville, I think, is where it was. But anyway, I remember that very, very distinctly. And I mean, us poor kids, man. The girls were in long skirts, and we're out there playing basketball and softball and just sweating like dogs, and no air conditioning, and it was nonstop indoctrination. We had classes; they'd split the boys and the girls up, and I think the last year I went, Renee and I we were engaged, and so again, I love my friends, and I feel so bad, but so I look back at that, and so many of the folks that were involved in that, most of them don't go to church now. I mean, very broken. Very similar stories to myself, and they didn't deconstruct. They didn't do anything. They said, forget all this, man. I'm out. It was sad, and the power that she wielded was crazy, and again, my wife and I were engaged during that period, and we ended up getting married. Or we had set a date in like June or something like that, and I went to visit Renee one day before a Wednesday service, and we sat and talked, and with her family, my family, and I don't know why, I don't remember. It's been a long time ago. We decided to get married earlier, and we set the date of December 27th. And I was in high school, but I wasn't a stupid person, and I had a lot of credits already, and I just graduated early. I had already achieved what and I was accepted to Rolls-Holman in engineering school. You had to be, at that point in time, they had to actually ask you to apply. You couldn't just go apply. It was really hard to get in. And I was able to do that. And, this whole cult thing, but that's another story. But we decided to get married early. And my childhood pastor, I decided I wanted him to be the one that presided over, gave me my vows or whatever. And we were both going to a church, her church, and it was in Kentucky. It was a really small church. And the gentleman there he was a nice guy, very funny, very nice, but he was not right. There was a lot of bad stuff going on. And at that point in time, unfortunately, he was having extramarital affair with someone in the church. And as luck would have it, he was going to do Renee's vows. He said, well, we're going to renew our vows after we do your wedding. And like, okay, he's our authority figure. You can't touch not the anointed, right? So we didn't know what to do, so we just let it happen. And that was a very traumatic thing looking back for Renee and myself. But I remember Renee just reminded me of this too. My grandpa videotaped this, and there's a shot in the videotape. We watched it back of the person that he was seeing crying while they're renewing his vows, and I'm sitting there like, man, like this is crazy. And it was like, and again, we see all this stuff every day. A new pastor, there's a new revelation or whatever, and we were living this chaos, and it made its way into our wedding, and it was already hard enough because her dad, who was a pastor in that organization, who by this time was not. She shared that a little bit of that story with you on her podcast. He didn't even show up. My dad walked Renee down the aisle. And the whole thing, looking back, it was like how heavily influenced this whole thing was by the cult. I mean, they just basically took over something that was very precious to us, and we were kids. And they didn't care. I mean, they just walked all over us and made it about this. And I'm pretty sure everyone knew what was going on, but no one would say anything, right? Again, you can't come against the headship or whatever else. And I don't think they didn't make it much longer after that. Surprise, surprise, spoiler alert. But yeah, it was really sad. It was like I say, it's unfortunate these leaders would. I mean, we were just their playthings, right? In this whole bizarre, crazy story, And I'm sure you probably witnessed things like this as well. But yeah, that to this day, that was one of the biggest things that really hurt us. And again, going through the deconstruction process, that was one of the big things that we had to deal with. And it was very, very sad, but it's our story, It's what happened to us.
It is sad, and
yeah.
A lot of people, whenever they're going through the process of deconstructing, they look at the really hard times, and they, as your mind is trying to detangle what happened to you, you look at those bad times as though they were traumatic, and truly some of them are. However, I've also noticed, and other people that have escaped have noticed, without those hard times, you may not have been able to completely deconstruct. So sometimes it's the hard experiences that help you get where you are today.
Yeah, definitely. And what the beautiful part of that is that it helps fuel that desire to change and to as a parent not have your children go through that same thing. And so it not only fuels that deconstruction part of it, but also fuels the reconstruction and reconstructing things in a safer, healthier manner. Again, we all say, you want to leave things better than what you found them. And that's kind of was one of the big things that really helped drive that. So we ended up getting married, and we moved. I went into college in Missouri. We moved to Missouri right after. We lived with my parents for a while. And while we were there, my dad kind of came back into the church. And again, like I say, on and off. And this is another really hard thing that really has driven me, is that pastor, he was basically everyone was poor. My dad had a good job, and he was very selfless human being, which he was the reason why I'm a very, very giving person. I'm not saying that for any other reason that I saw that with my mom and dad both, actually. both of them. Very, very giving. And my dad was going through classes and became an associate pastor in that small church briefly. And my dad didn't have much because, again, he took care of us and was very giving. And I don't know how this came about. I don't know if that pastor convinced my dad to do this or if my dad did it on his own. I can't imagine. I think it was a combination of the two. I can't say because I don't know. But my dad had rode motorcycles his whole life. And that was a passion of his. And he had a Harley that he would get down and take black paint and any of the little road chips in the bottom, he would lay down and he would touch up every little imperfection. Wow. That thing was beautiful. It was immaculate. It was a beautiful motorcycle. He sold that, and I was like, "What are you doing?" And he was like, "Well, I feel like God wants me, whatever." I watched him take that money. Was in a white envelope, just a small letter envelope, not a big one. And he walked down and put that in the plate. And that broke my heart. Just absolutely broke my heart. And I was so angry because any normal human being that thinks like norm in a normal term, just whatever, not twisted like these individuals were, I would have pulled him aside after church and handed that back to him and said, "Man, I know what this meant to you. Go buy another bike," right? But that didn't happen. And that's one of the things that I'm still, if I'm honest, I'm still angry about it because, again, that meant a lot to him. And that still, like I say, sticks with me because I knew that this guy wasn't honest, the pastor. And I knew a lot of the things that were going on. And by this time I was, like 17, 18 years old. And I was like, man, this is twisted. But anyway, we moved. And my dad eventually wasn't, associated with them any longer. And we moved to Missouri, and I went to college. And I remember when I got to college, I started thinking differently. I started seeing things from a different world viewpoint, right? And you're in these classes, and I just remember this part. I remember this one teacher. And I made me so mad when he said it. I don't know how he got off on it. He was an English teacher about John the Revelator. And he said, I think he was smoking dope when he wrote Revelation, whatever. And it made me really angry. And he's like, that stuff's crazy. But looking back, what that did to me is I'm like, I wonder, like, is everything that I read, is it true? Or like why do I believe what I believe? And I started questioning things very heavily. And I remember one day I was in the school library working on a paper. And I stumbled across this. There were 7 of them, if I remember correctly. And they were Jewish history books. And I was like, what is this? And so I checked them out, like 2 or 3 of them. And I started reading. And I was like, oh my God. It was stuff that Bernice was teaching. And it was fantasy. It was, and I'm assuming it was Jewish mysticism.
Wow.
I'm guessing that's what that was.
Yeah, Jewish mysticism.
And and so I would read these things, and I went to my pastor. I'm like, "Man, we got to talk." And he was a good guy. He was just a country guy in a rural Christ Gospel church in Missouri. And instead of like, "Oh my God, this is crazy," he preached a sermon on one of the things I shared with him. I'm like, "What?" I'm like, that's not what I was thinking. And I'm like, and so it was wild. But John, there were so many things that were in her books that were in those books. It was the same thing. And I'm assuming that, I'm guessing some of it was plagiarized. I'm sure it had to have been. And so I started to develop this mindset that, man, like, this stuff isn't real, man. Like at least what we're being taught. And so the church ended up splitting because I'll give that gentleman credit. Bernice would call and he would like, oh man, she chewed me out because he wasn't teaching what she was teaching. And I made, as I look back, what I think was a very poor decision. I stayed in Christ Gospel because My family was in it. Most of my friends that got me there, and I was actually best friends with one of his sons. And we cried and cried because we knew what this meant, right? Like, we couldn't be friends, which is asinine. And that's exactly what happened. And we ended up getting a pastor that I went to church camp with, that he was a toddler. I mean, he was a kid. And he married one of the girls that we knew, and she wasn't extremely nice. And I was like, man, what is going on? I got this kid now as our pastor. So he came to me, and in one of my more brilliant moments, because I was starting to really, unbeknownst to myself, deconstruct from this, and said, man, you're called to be a pastor, and blah, 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 which we were, John, I'm sure you were told you were called to be a pastor. I mean, we were all called, right? It was one of the ways I kept us in. And so we started doing pastoral classes. And so, which we had to buy the books we didn't have the money for. And what we bought were these workbooks that were direct quotes from her books, which were quotes from somebody else, but, truthfully. And we fill in the blanks. And like to get a certificate. And so we were in this class one day, and one of my other best friends that I had was with me during the fasting, it wasn't the one that walked to get the pizza. And so he was like, we were sitting there, and the guy started talking about how to control the church. And we were like, looking at each other like, what? And so he said, well, you have to politic the church members to get them, to put them where you need them to be. And so I raised my hand. I'm like, do you mean lie? No. We're going to politic them. I said, man, I think you mean lie. And so I was just like, we got out of that class, and my buddy called me. Back then we had cell phones, and I was like, man, what do you think? I said, I think it's crazy, man. Like he's like, I don't think we should go back. And we ended up like, man, we're going to press pause on this. And it was sad because that poor kid, just literally, they spent their honeymoon at that church. They were living upstairs in a temporary in his office, and it was just so sad until they could find themselves. And they didn't stay long, and I don't think they're still together. I think it was another example where what they would do is they would just take these people and just move them around. They would go to the witness room, right? Which we talked about that, right?
Yeah, we did.
I think last time. I don't know if you remember. Yeah. And so these people would just make these life decisions for folks. And I mean, I don't even think they believed it either. And they would move these families all around the country, right? And so that's what happened to this young man. And basically, he left. And they said in another gentleman who they moved from another failed church in Indiana. And this guy would get up, and he kept talking about, he called his sermon The Little Red House of Pain. And he was very angry because he had to uproot his whole family. And he proceeded to browbeat us every single sermon. And and it was all about pain and suffering, and we're not worthy. And it was just, and during this time, I started getting back into my deconstruction, and because I was like, Renee, this isn't healthy. This isn't healthy. This isn't healthy. And we were youth pastors at the time, and we started having kids come to us with heavy, heavy, heavy stuff that was going on in their families. And the church split again. And they got rid of that pastor. And during this time, it got really, really ugly. And I told Renee, I said, I've had enough. And Renee told some stories in her podcast. And one of the pastors that she referenced was one of the directors, or district elder, or whatever they called them. And I called him up. And I said, listen, there's a lot of really bad stuff going on in this church. A lot of, just chaos. And he basically told me to shut up and stay in line. And I told Renee, and that was that was a very important person in Renee and I, both of our lives. We had been friends with these folks for a long time, and that I didn't know what to do with all this. Right, I had all these heavy things going on with these kids, and at the same time, I took a job, and I was a nurse at that point. I was out of nursing school, and I started selling devices, and I came in contact with some really cool people that were also people of faith. And I went to these meetings and and they would have a beer or a glass of wine or whatever. And I was like, wow, I thought they were, like, wait, they're Christian? They're not Christians. But then I got to know them, and they were amazing people. And I was like, now I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do with all this, And so that was kind of the story you told. I loved in one of your podcasts that you're talking about the glass of wine. I absolutely love that because I lived that moment myself.
Wow.
And yeah. And it was like one of these things where I'm like, I came home and I said, Renee, we really have to start thinking about this whole thing because unbeknownst to us, there are normal people out there that don't live like this that are Christians. And I really appreciate you sharing that story because I had laughed. It was in one of your podcasts. And I told Renee, I said, you got to watch this one because you're going to really understand what John went through. But again, that was kind of like, I don't know, when you went through that moment, I don't know if that was kind of one of the epiphanies you had or, when you started rubbing shoulders with people that were normal, that were Christians as well. But, I'm sure you've went through that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the bottom line is that I learned that there were normal people out there, but more than that, I learned that I wasn't normal. So that was one of the things that hit me. And, we were so indoctrinated to think it was life or death, heaven or hell, these little things. And I mean, the greatest miracle that Jesus did in the Bible, one of the biggest miracles is the water to wine, right? It's in all of the movies. It's in all of the story. We had sermons talking about how Jesus turned water into wine, and then out of the same breath, but don't you drink it now. And so I'm like, well, what on earth were we thinking, man? How were we that stupid?
Yeah. I remember a class that I don't know. Do you remember the name Jim Caseman?
No, I don't.
Yeah, that's okay. So Jim Caseman was one of the pastors in the Word of Faith movement, and we were doing these Bible classes. Once again, we found ourselves, in one of these situations when we were in North Dakota where we were kind of getting indoctrinated again and kind of getting back into it. And one of the classes, we were talking about the water into wine. He did a whole series on how there were all these different. There was 2 or 3 different words for wine in the Bible. Some was fermented, some was unfermented, and he was trying to prove to us in these classes that it was unfermented wine, but he couldn't get this. He couldn't line up the scriptures to say it. And so the gist of it was that, it's the spirit of what God says in some of these passages. So you can't really take it literally. You have to understand, God's heart isn't for you to drink real wine. And so it couldn't be fermented wine when in fact it really was. But anyway, and that was like, and I told Renee, we were doing these classes, and by now I'm having glasses of wine and stuff. And I'm like, okay, I got to get out of this because I'm not being very honest with these people. But I told Renee, I said, I was more convinced than ever that it was real wine and that God doesn't have a problem with you drinking wine after that class than I was before the class. I'm like, he had the opposite effect on me for sure. And so we, it was just crazy. But going back to just kind of realizing how abnormal we were when you start to get out in the real world and meet people that were normal. And so we were still in Missouri at that point when I was meeting these folks and started really coming to the realization that, we got to get out of here, right? And I remember I went away to a meeting and I came back, and I shared a little bit about this last time, but Renee had decided, like, okay, I get it. Like our kids, my daughter's wearing skirts. She's starting middle school. And Renee said, I don't want my family to go through what I went through. Right. And these poor kids have been indoctrinated and taught so many bad things. And I remember coming back, and Renee was like, she visited another church, and it went very poorly. And she went back, and she ended up cutting her hair, which was a big no-no, right? And so I remember going. She went back. I came home from the meeting. She cut her hair, and I left again because I was doing my training. I had to do a lot of training courses, like a week at a time, and I had to go back. And she visited another church, and she felt horrible because we were still struggling. We were just had gotten out of this, and she went back and visited, and she was treated so poorly by people that we thought were, near and dear to us. And again, looking back, I was so angry because she called me and she was bawling, and I had to try to console her from Minnesota, and she's down there in Missouri. And it was another one of those moments when you look back that again fuel you, because we were basically told like, hey, you guys messed up, but if you do this and do this and do this, or don't do this and don't do that, then you can come back in, right? And I remember having a meeting with the pastor and told him, I was like, we're out. We're not coming back. I said, I'm going to meet with the kids. I said, let me tell the youth group. So I met with them after an event we had, and it was a lot of tears. It was brutal. And I remember, I think I shared this last time, him calling me and said, hey, are you sure you're going to miss out on the prize? And I'm like, man, I don't know what kind of prize you think you got, but I've seen enough, and I think you didn't win you got a gag gift is what you got. You know what I mean? You didn't get a prize.
Yeah.
And so, and so we left, and we went to, and at this point in our lives, we started, deciding that, hey, again, deconstructing when you didn't know you're deconstructing.
That's quite a journey, man. When people who've never experienced anything like this come in contact with people, I experience it too. When people see me and they hear that I'm out of this cult, they want to use my head like a guinea pig, ask all these questions and figure out who I am and how this cult ruined me is essentially what they're trying to get at. But what they don't realize is that's not truly the case. It's that the sum of our experiences is what makes us who we are. And we went through, yes, a very, very bad thing. We had some really hard experiences, awful things that most people will never ever experience, but it helped to make us who we are today. So as you have these experiences and you overcome them, I hate to use the term, but what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So as we're coming through this and getting stronger, it's quite a journey. So thank you for sharing this with us.
Yeah, no, I hope hopefully it helps folks. I know taking, as I look, my only advice to folks would be, as you go and you enter the rebuilding phase of things, just being able to go back and trying to work through them and not be as so angry, and just use those things to help remind you of where you came from and to help you not go back. I think that's the biggest thing. Don't forget, you have to learn these lessons.
Absolutely. Revictimization it's a thing. It's real. And there are people who escape. And then what happens is they try to enter a new group and try to join something else. And they've not really had those experiences. Like we mentioned earlier, the culture, it's culture shock when they try to go to a new group. And so they try to go back to what's comfortable, and they find a comfortable place. Sadly, after you leave a cult, what's comfortable is another cult. So it's one of those things that you got to be really careful, and you have to, like I did. I took the time and I tried to learn the culture and tried to understand what it is I'm leaving and what it is I'm heading towards. So I fully agree, revictimization is difficult. But again, thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah. No, you're welcome. Thank you for letting me come back.
Well, if you've enjoyed our show and you want to share your story, you can check us out on the web. You can find us at william-branham.org. For more about the dark side of the New Apostolic Reformation, you can read Weaponized Religion, From Christian Identity to the NAR, available on Amazon, Kindle, and Audible.